Machanaim has three main events referencing it. Besides being mentioned as a city of Leviim and one of the Nitzavim or officials of Shlomo Melech being placed there. The most famous is probably Yaakov splitting his camp here into two as Esav's army approaches. The second is in Sefer Shmuel Bet, where Ishbosheth, the son of Shaul, chooses Machanaim as his capital. And the third is when David HaMelech runs to Machanaim, when his son Avshalom rebels against him. As is often our practice, by examining what the different events taking place in the same area have in common, we can learn about the place itself and hopefully also gain some insights into the various events themselves in return. In all three cases, we have groups who seem to want to avoid their competition and are seeking a place of refuge from them. In Bereshit, we have Yaakov, who'd been running from Laban, and now having overcome that challenge is preparing to face Esav and his entourage. Then a strange thing happens. Along with davening for help and sending gifts, Yaakov sets up camp and purposely splits the camp into two so that they can sleep peacefully. This perhaps being one of the reasons why the place is called Machanaim. Makes sense. That way, they can get a good night's sleep before the challenging day ahead. But then, he gets up in the middle of the night and helps everyone cross the Yabok River. Then why not do that to begin with? Why split up the camp and then wait until the middle of the night and cross anyway? This might have been one of Yaakov's most vulnerable moments before Esav. He doesn't know exactly when he'll be attacked, and they do have to have some energy in store as they prepare to meet him. But Esav could arrive at any moment to attack them by surprise. The most strategic moment could be right while they're crossing the riverbed. At that point, they find it difficult to protect themselves, and as such, pushing it off until the middle of the night, when Esav might be least likely to attack, could be part of this reasoning. So they wait to cross until that point, and in the meantime decide to get some rest. To be on the safe side, they still split up and wait on the far side of the Abok River until the time comes to cross. There could, however, be another interesting explanation that I've just thought of recently as more and more of the academic community are backing a specific site for Machanaim in the area of Jordan of today. Around 6 kilometers to the east of where the Abok, or Wadi Zarqa, spills into the Jordan River, there's a loop in the river which divides between two hilltops, one on either side, known as Tel Adadab al-Garbi and Tel Adadab al-Sharqi. The similar names seem to connect between them. Some suggest that the two are related sites and could be relating to Machanaim and Pnuel. To begin with, these would both be in the same place and only split up later to neighboring sites. But what if the two hills were originally the two camps of Machanaim? I often wondered how that must have felt, feeling so threatened that you split your family into two groups in case one of them is attacked, Khalila. And which one do you camp with? Although you probably wouldn't get too much sleep in such a situation anyway. But according to this understanding, it would seem that Yaakov didn't split his family into two groups. When he splits his camp into two groups, there's one group of servants and the likes who are already sent across the Yabok and set up camp there on the far side. In other words, to the south of the Yabok. If anyone's attacked, it'll likely be them, and his family themselves, still across the Yabok from Esav's clan, meaning to the north of the Yabok, may still be able to escape back to where they came from, which we'll talk about in a moment. If they're not attacked, then the group to the south of the Yabok can help guard while the family does end up crossing a bit later. Again, based on the hope that there would be less of a chance of being attacked in the middle of the night, as most people back then didn't travel at such hours. In addition, it's from this forward camp that the groups would head out with the gifts towards Esav. This, of course, could also have been used as an attempt to try to receive word on how close Esav was and if it looked as if an attack was imminent. Then, in the middle of the night, Yaakov helps his two wives, two shvachot, and 11 children to cross the Yabok, just as it says in the Psukim. Meaning, until this point, despite the camps having split, all of them were still north of the Yabok. If the two camps were on these two hills, then this backs this idea that they were all still north of the Yabok, while the servants were the ones who already crossed southwards towards Esav. I will say that this is my first impression while reading the relevant articles, and I do have my questions about it. I would like to look more into the specific topography of the immediate region and to see if it fits this understanding. We're not done yet with Sefer Bereshit, and we'll be back to it soon. The next major event is in the beginning of Shmuel Bet. Shaul has fallen on Mount Gilboa, and the kingdom in essence splits. David HaMelech rules in Hebron, while Ishbosheth, Shaul's son, rules over most of the other Shvatim, but interestingly, has his capital in Machanaim, in Eivra Yarden. We can understand David HaMelech setting up his capital in Hebron. Besides the historical and religious significance of Hebron, its location also gives political importance. Being as it's in the Judean hills south of Yerushalayim, it's centrally located within the territory of Nachalat Yehuda. Hebron is thus perfectly placed for providing David with a strong regional support base between the area of Beit Lechem, where he comes from, and the areas where his wives come from, as we've already discussed earlier in this series. Perhaps this is why they're mentioned again explicitly in Shmuel Bet, Perek Bet, when we already know about them. The Perek is emphasizing that this is part of what led to the placement of the capital in Hebron. Compared to Machanaim, which was on the periphery of Israelite control, Hebron was central, giving David easier access to influence the various Shvatim nearby. Why would Ishbosheth have his capital in such a remote location? True, he could say perhaps that it's an important site in our heritage as well, as it's there that we first received the name Yisrael. But he could in essence say that in Bethel as well, as Rav ben Avad probably did. Again, back to this in a moment. Next, we have David HaMelech later on in Shmuel Bet, who runs to Machanaim when his son Avshalom rebels against him. Of course, we'll go into the details of this rebellion later, but for now, rather than fighting Avshalom straight out, he moves his loyal troops to Machanaim. The goal seems to be to avoid straight-out conflict while remaining safe in a place where escape would be possible. The key to understanding all three of these main events taking place in Machanaim could be its proximity to the wild areas of the Upper Gilad, known as Harei HaGilad. The area of the Gilad is split into Upper and Lower Gilad, each made up of different subregions with various different types of topography. For our purposes, the area north of the Yabok riverbed is more rugged and not as easily traversed as some of the more comfortable areas south of the Yabok. As such, it was not usually heavily settled and built up, not as convenient for farming and even trade routes, and was left to become an overgrown foresty area. While not good for those looking to settle, this can be ideal for those on the run and needing to seek refuge in the wilderness. As such, perhaps Yaakov started out through here while on the run from Laban, who ended up catching up with him anyway, eventually. Ishbosheth probably wanted to keep his distance from David HaMelech in fear that, like most kings in ancient times, and even many barbaric rulers today, he thought that David would try to get rid of the competition. Just like, for example, what happens in some of our neighboring countries in the region of modern Israel, where when a new leader comes to power, they tend to throw the previous leader into prison, or worse, along with any other political opponents who may cause trouble. David had no intention of doing this, as he firmly believed that Hashem would take care of everything. But distance itself wasn't the only factor for Ishbosheth. Putting the capital in Machanaim was a last-ditch attempt at having a capital while hoping that he'd have a chance to flee into the wilderness if chased. David finds himself in the same area later on when chased by Avshalom. Here he would fend better than Ishbosheth ever could have if he had needed to, though it's interesting to wonder if there could be some mida connected mida hinted at in the geography. Either way, here too, David needed a place where, on the one hand, he could set up camp safely, but on the other, if Avshalom ends up chasing him, he can retreat into the wilderness, which is exactly what ends up happening in the end. Here, David and his men had an incredible advantage, as we'll see. Perhaps this even relates to the seemingly less significant references to Machanaim. One is it being a city of refuge, could be very fitting, as people on the run came in this direction anyway to seek refuge, and two, as the site for one of Shlomo's nitzavim or officials. In order for Shlomo to truly have control over the region, he'll have to have a strong hand over areas that in the past have been the rallying point for rebels and refugees. This has been another example of how we can use the topography and the geography to try to understand the events of the Tanakh anew.